Okay. Is that my kid?
Huh?
Is that my kid to start?
Yes.
Good. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you again for braving the cold. Be here. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. The last, a little bit sad that it's the last year in the series. There will be more in the future. Very, very excited about tonight's topic. It's a very interesting topic. It's a very new topic that we're talking about. Called this in a moment. You'll see the source sheet. It says artificial intelligence. Will a robot replace my rabbi? So if I'm not here tomorrow, the robot in my place, you'll know why. But you'll have to stay till the end of the year to find out. Yeah, you can hand those out. Thank you. So we're going to talk. There's a few things. The truth is there is so much to unpack here. You know, some of the topics we've spoken about in the past. I mean, we began the series talking about cultured meat. You know, there's pretty much as fascinating as it is. There's one question. You know, is it kosher? Is it not kosher? Meat, is it not? Okay, two questions. I mean, artificial intelligence really opens up a whole world. There are many, many issues to talk about, many things we could discuss. I'm going to try and focus just on two of them, and we'll see where we get to. But, you know, just I Googled artificial intelligence, got more than 1 billion results. You know, there's a lot to say, a lot to unpack over here. But let's begin with source number one on your source sheet. It says, how will AI change the world? So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, some of the things that this technology already does, some of the things that are on the way, it says like this: artificial intelligence is already changing the world in many ways and is expected to have an even greater impact in the future. Here are some ways AI is likely to change the world. Number one, automation. AI is already being used to automate many tasks, from manufacturing to customer services. This will continue to increase. Okay, that in itself is relatively straightforward. There's nothing particularly intelligent about automation, but it's a way that it's that it's making things more efficient. Number two, improved healthcare. We'll talk about this a little bit more. AI can help to identify diseases and medical conditions more accurately and quickly than humans. It can also assist in drug discovery, treatment planning, and patient monitoring. There are all sorts of technologies. For example, a lot of scans, X-rays, reading diagnosis, AI technologies, which are being trained in order to, based on large amounts of data, looking at various pictures and scans from the past, and in many ways can tell better than a human doctor could, what the diagnosis would be. Number three, enhanced productivity. Number four, personalization. Number five, better communication. Number six, transport. AI can be used to optimize traffic flow, reduce congestion, improve safety on roads and in the air. Anybody can have use Waze, right? That's artificial intelligence right there. Number seven, environmental protection. AI can help to monitor and analyze environmental data, develop more effective strategies for protecting the planet. Number eight, education. AI can be used to personalize learning for individual students based on their abilities and interests. It can also help to automate routine tasks such as grading and lesson planning. I mentioned this a few weeks ago as well. AI right now can do your homework for you. Right? Is that raises its own ethical questions, right? In a number of years, I'm very, very doubtful that anybody will get as a homework assignment, write a 500-word essay on X, because the AI can already do it better than most humans can, and we'll have to figure out new ways. But these are some of the things which AI can do. Overall, AI has the potential to revolutionize many aspects of our lives, from healthcare and education, transportation, environmental protection. However, it's important to ensure the development and deployment of AI is done responsibly, with attention to ethical considerations and potential risks. Okay, so all of that, source number one. I didn't write the source for where I got this information from, because as you probably guessed by now, this was all generated by AI. I went into ChatGPT and I said, tell me, how will AI change the world? And within about 3 seconds, you can see it typing in front of you. This is the answer that came up. Right? This is not, and again, to understand, this is not Google. This is not searching, finding something that's already been written, piece of information that is out there somewhere. But these programs, this model, it's been trained, it has a mass of information which it's learned, and it's able to recognize patterns, and it's able to recognize, take details from one place and from another, and it constructed this text. We'll see a little bit later on, maybe some other things. And everybody's been talking about it recently, ChatGPT. So, for example, someone mentioned to me a few weeks ago, there was a rabbi somewhere who gave his drasha that was written by ChatGPT. I still think the human ones are better, but that's over time that may change. There is President Herzog recently was at a conference, some high-tech conference. I don't remember exactly what it was, But the first three paragraphs of his speech or so were written by AI for him. And then he announced it. Yesterday, there was a Knesset who gave a speech, which had totally been written by AI as well. She wanted to make the point that AI is more sensible than we are. She may be right, but that was it. So these things are everywhere. And again, it's already in many places. It's in our lives. If you've ever written an email, or you've ever received an email, you see at the bottom there are suggested responses you can get back. That's AI. Sometimes when you're typing, when I was typing up the source sheet for this shiur, and I would write a sentence, and then Word gives me auto-suggest. I'm not talking about autocorrect. I'm talking about it suggests how to write the rest of your sentence for you. That's artificial intelligence. You've gone into YouTube, you've gone into Amazon, you've bought something, and then you have suggested things for you to watch next or to listen. All of this is artificial intelligence. All these things are becoming more and more sophisticated, and they're becoming more and more ubiquitous in our lives in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of spheres, and all sorts of arenas, and that is leading to a number of ethical questions, some general ethical questions, some specific halachic questions. Let me just give you a few more examples. I saw this in October 2022, so a few months ago. It was published that in Denmark, there is a political party that is run by AI. I don't think they actually got into the parliament, but they would call themselves the Synthetic Party. It is a new Danish political party with an artificially intelligent representative. Some would say that all parties have artificially intelligent representatives, but we'll leave that for now. And policies derived from AI, eyeing a seat in parliament, that hope to run in the country's November general election. So I saw this in October. At the time, they only had 11 out of the 20,000 signatures needed to be eligible. But the fact is there is such a concept, and it could exist. And they had a chatbot called Leader Lars, who was the leader of this party, and it worked out the policies based on artificial intelligence. So all sorts of things that are happening. Like I said, probably one of the more well-developed areas already where this exists in medicine, medical technology. There's a lot of work being done regarding AI in medicine. It's being used in the military, it's being used in intelligence, all sorts of places. So one of the issues that this raises is that these technologies come in and replace former jobs which were done by human beings, right? A lot of jobs, or there's a threat in the workplace of things being cut. Have a look at source number 2. This is a former Microsoft executive who says that with more artificial intelligence comes the threat of more human jobs being replaced by technology. Now he's talking about more the simplest, the easiest jobs, what he calls the low-hanging fruit, menial sort of things. Automation is something that AI is very, very good at doing, and so a lot of these jobs it's taken over. Second paragraph, it says some companies have already begun implementing innovation and technology into their workforce. Walmart said in December it plans to deploy hundreds of robot janitors to clean stores. E-commerce giant Amazon began testing cashierless checkout technology. It's reported by Fox Business. HSBC's flagship branch hired Pepper the robot to help greet and inform customers. Okay, this is already back in February 2019, so there's much more of this. I saw there was another article which said that within the next 15 years, 40% of jobs are going to be replaced. I think others put the numbers much higher than that. But this is one question already. We have these technologies and we're bringing them in, but it's going to take people out of their jobs. It's going to remove employment. Is there something that should be done? On the other hand, if these things are really for the betterment of society, and these things are going to improve our lives in innumerable ways, do we have the right not to use it and not to implement this technology? So that's just maybe as an opening. But there are a lot, as I said, there are a lot of ethical issues. If you type into the chatbot and you say, what are the ethical issues? It said, what did it say over here? With attention to ethical considerations and potential risks. So I didn't bring you the answer, but then I said to the AI, what are the ethical considerations and potential risks? And it came up with a list. They talk about transparency, talk about accuracy, talk about bias, and these are some of the things. So the first one I want to talk about is maybe one that sounds a little bit like science fiction, but I think has very much has some very, very relevant and poignant parts for us to take away, and some halachic nafkaminas which may come out as well. And that is, maybe I'll start with the story. A few years ago, I was speaking at a conference in London. I had a doctor, a professor in my community whose area of research is in artificial intelligence and medical applications in the medical sphere. Again, looking at different tools, diagnostic tools, etc. And he ran a conference and he wanted to discuss some of the moral elements of this. Now it's being spoken about a little bit more, but already even 3-4 years ago. This is a relatively new era. So he invited me along with a couple of professors, and there was a Christian professor, there was an atheist. It was like a joke, a rabbi, a Christian theologist, and atheist walked to a conference. So anyway, we're walking, and one of the professor gets up to speak, and he's talking about artificial intelligence, and he talks about autonomous vehicles. And he says, I want to talk about autonomous vehicles, but what we have today, what everybody's talking about, are not autonomous vehicles. They're just cars that are very good at not crashing into things. What did he mean? He said, autonomous, you may get to a point that sounds like science fiction, but where the machine has got consciousness. There was a controversy a few weeks ago, or a few months ago. There was one engineer at Google who claimed that one of their systems had reached a sentence, that you had a certain form of consciousness, and Google came out to deny. They said he was wrong. One of the big questions is, how would you tell? How are you able to know? But whether, right now, these systems do not have consciousness.
He got fired.
He got fired?
He got fired.
Okay. So right now, these systems do not have consciousness. And, they are not, but the question is, how do we relate to them? How do we treat them? If they reach that point, or even before that point, maybe we have responsibility in terms of the way that we treat. Now, I'm not saying what these people are saying. There's an organization, I'm sure people have heard of PETA, which is People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. So there is an organization, I think this is real, you can find it online, it's called PETRL, P-E-T-R-L, People for the Ethical Treatment of Reinforcement Learners, promoting moral consideration for algorithms. Could not make this up. And it says like this from their website: you are just an algorithm implemented on biological hardware. We take the view that humans are just algorithms implemented on biological hardware. Machine intelligences have moral weight in the same way that humans and non-human animals do. There is no ethically justified reason to prioritize algorithms implemented on carbon over algorithms implemented on silicon. End quote. I do not believe in that. I do not agree with that. I don't think that is our view. That sounds extreme, sounds a little bit wacky. There are people who think like that. But what should our approach be towards these things? People talk about the golem, people talk about things like that. But a lot of the systems we're talking about now, the artificial intelligence, the chat GPT, which I mentioned, it's just a chatbot, meaning there's nobody there. There's not, you're sitting on your computer, you're typing in lines, it's typing in lines back to you. There's no other persona. However, there are systems that are being developed to look like people and act like people, and maybe give the impression that they are, although they are robots, somewhat like people. Have a look at source number 3. This is something which the Merck group are working on. It's called Petra. And they say like this: picture a situation. You're concerned about your health, but you didn't go to your doctor yet. Perhaps you've been putting it off as you're worried about wasting their time. Or you may feel embarrassed to show your problems or fear being judged. But what if there was another option? Interacting with a robot at your local pharmacy, shopping mall, airport, or train station to find out if you have an undiagnosed illness. It could then suggest what you can do next, such as helping you to book a doctor's appointment directly or advising on steps you can take to improve your health. Right? We've all been to medical centers, hospitals, etc. You go in, you have the triage. They take your blood pressure. They take whatever. It doesn't take that part of the process does not take a great amount of skill. A robot can do this very, very easily. So, and one of the things you see, you look at the picture that you have on the first page. That is sort of their illustration of how this will look. But one of the things they're working on, you see the second paragraph in source number 3. Says this Petra robot, which stands for pre-screening experience through robot assessment, can currently screen for 3 different health conditions. She has been deliberately designed to look, feel, and act more human. She has a warm personality, encouraging people to share information about their personal habits and health concerns. Meaning, one of the things people are realizing is that we interact with robots differently to the way that we interact with humans. And there are certain things which a human doctor can provide, and there is a certain warmth in that interaction. So robots are being designed, artificial intelligence is being designed in such a way to try and mimic the human behavior, to try and mimic the human look. Once it gets close enough, so our question is, do we then have a responsibility going back in terms of the way that we act, the way that we treat towards these robots, even the way in which we act towards these chatbots? Now, I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but what I'm suggesting over here is that this is important, not in the sense of how the machine will feel, but in terms of how we will feel, in terms of what it's going to do to us. When more and more of our day-to-day interaction that we have, is not actually with people, but is going to be with machines. And especially if the machines look like humans, if we get used to treating them in such a way, how are we going to get used to treating each other? And you already see this. You already see this in many, many places. For example, first of all, in our sources, just to show you that I'm not totally crazy and making this up, we all know the famous midrash about Moshe Rabbeinu in the first 3 makot, right? We know that the first 3 makot of dam, tzvadeh, kinin, blood, and then frogs, which came from the Nile, came from the river, and then you have kinin, lice, which comes from the ground. Those 3 makot, Moshe Rabbeinu was not the one to hit the Nile or to hit the ground in order to bring about the makot. It was Aaron. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was showing gratitude. The Nile River, which had saved him when he was a baby, the ground which had hit the Egyptian whom he had killed and therefore protected him. And and when we were little children and we learn these midrashim, and it's very nice. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying thank you to the river and thank you to the ground. We get a little bit older and we think, wait a minute, the river doesn't really think. The river is not a sentient being. Although that is something that has happened. There has been a case in India where there was a lawsuit actually bringing about civil rights for a river as a sort of sentient being, or however they defined it. That's for another discussion. But it's not in terms of what it does to them, but in terms of within ourselves, within our own effort, our own midot, to show that experience of gratitude. And that's what's being taught here. When already psychologists talk about this, you see when the way that people talk to each other in person versus the way that people talk to each other online, right, is nowadays people don't talk nicely to each other anyway. But there's what's called the online disinhibition effect. A lot of violence and a lot of bullying and cyberbullying and all these things, because when you don't see the person in front of you, it's much easier to confront them. It's much easier to say nasty things. It's much easier. There's no consequence. You're looking at somebody straight in the face. You may have noticed when you're talking to somebody and you have something difficult to say, 90% of people look down and avoid eye contact. But when there is no eye contact in the first place, so there's no problem. So when all the people, so much of our interaction is taking place in this way, it's going to train us in the way that we treat people as well. And especially if these things are going to look like people and act like people and sound like people. So maybe that's a question as well. So somebody who's discussed this, I mentioned him a couple of weeks ago, is a rabbi by the name of Moise Navon, who was one of the founding engineers of Mobileye. And he's done a lot of work in terms of when we spoke about autonomous cars, cars that don't bump into other things. Where he spoke about some of the ethical questions and the programming, he was very involved in that. So he has an article which he wrote, which he published, source number 4. It's called "The Virtuous Servant Owner Paradigm Whose Time Has Come Again." And he says, social robots are coming. They are being designed to enter our lives and help in everything, from child rearing to elderly care, from household chores to personal therapy, and the list goes on. There is great promise that these machines will further the progress that their predecessors achieved, enhancing our lives and alleviating us of the many tasks with which we'd rather not be occupied. But there's a dilemma. On the one hand, these machines are just that, machines. Accordingly, some thinkers propose we maintain this perspective and relate to social robots as tools, yet in treating them as such, it is argued we deny our own natural empathy, ultimately inculcating vicious as opposed to virtuous dispositions. So he says, I propose an approach that I believe sits in the middle ground between one extreme of treating social robots as mere machines versus the other extreme of accepting social robots as having human-like status. I call the approach the virtuous servant owner, based on the virtue ethics of the Rabbi. And it's very interesting. He takes as his paradigm, as his model for this, the Rambam in Hilchot Avadim, that connection to Pashat Shafua, right? But the Rambam in Hilchot Avadim, where he's talking about, there's a difference between an Eved Ivri and an Eved Kanaani, a non-Jewish slave. And over here, source number 5, the Rambam gives us the laws, the basic laws for how one is would have to treat an Eved Kanaani, a non-Jewish slave. And he says, according to the strict letter of the law, you are allowed to make them work very hard and engage in difficult labor. But nonetheless, says the Rambam, that is the line of that is the letter of the law. That is the baseline. But nonetheless, that's not the way you should be acting. He says, Midat Chasidut v'darkei chokhmah she'adam rachman v'rodef tzedek v'lo yachbib ulo al avdo v'lo yetzelo. It is a Midat Chasidut, and it is a clever way to act. A person should be merciful. A person should chase after justice. A person should not work the slave, even the slave, too hard. shouldn't make things difficult for him. Every food and drink which he has, give it to the slave. This is what the sages would do. They would feed them first before feeding themselves, and so on. He goes on, don't disparage him, don't disgrace him, don't scream at him, don't get angry at him, etc. He says this is the midah of the Jewish people, the second part, which is in bold. In source number 5 in the Rambam, he says, the Jewish people are merciful on everyone and everything. We are commanded to emulate the ways, the midot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be merciful on all of his creations, just as he is. And that is the way that we need to act. That is the way we need to think. Says the Rambam, writing 1,000 years ago, right, regarding slaves. And so says Rabbi Moshe Navon, writing about 3 years ago, in source number 6. He says, my point here is not to argue for even this most virtuous form of human slavery, but to apply the Maimonidean paradigm, what I call the virtuous servant owner, to human-robot relationships. For though the virtuous practices demanded by Maimonides address in part the biological needs of a human servant, right, feeding him, etc., he says, in general, they express the need for dignity, compassion, and consideration, which are practices that every virtuous individual must pursue, whether his interlocutor is human or, as is my thesis, humanoid. Accordingly, while feeding the servant first is not relevant, because your robot doesn't need to eat, but saying please and thank you is relevant. Saying please and thank you to Alexa, whatever it is. Part and parcel of the requirement to speak calmly, not because the robot needs to hear please or thank you, but because that's the way we should be behaving. When we are treating an other as an other, that's going to influence our behavior as well. Similarly, while feeding the servant every dish, the master is inapplicable. Not raising one's voice in anger, nor one's hand in violence is most applicable, falling under the rubric of not disgracing the servant verbally or physically, etc. And so he goes on. That is his suggestion. I haven't really seen anybody else who's taken this question, this angle, and developed it at such length. I'll just say one other thing, and then we'll move on to the next issue. But a few weeks ago, one day my wife was on the way home, and she saw some Wolt drivers in one of the streets, and then there was another one. You're just thinking, who is ordering all this takeaway? And they were having a protest. You may have discovered, if you tried to order from Wolt recently, they're having some issues because the Wolt drivers were striking or were complaining about their about their pay and about their conditions, etc. And one of the things that got me thinking was, again, and different people may have different practices, but very, very often, when you go to a restaurant and a waiter comes and brings you and serves you, at the end, you leave a tip. You leave a tip for the waiter who's been serving you. When you order through an app, and you get given the option to tip, how many people? My guess would be that less people over there are tipping. I think one of the reasons is you don't have a human being, who's having an interaction with you. It's a machine, it's an app, but yeah, there are actual human beings on the other side. We just don't realize it. We don't see it. So I think all of these things, if so much of our interaction and these machines are acting in such a way that they're replicating that human-to-human interaction, not because the machines actually have feelings or consciousness or thoughts or sentience or anything like that, but in terms of what it does to us, and in terms of the way that we act and we treat each other and will treat our fellow humans, this is something to think about in terms of the way that we act towards. So that is one point. Again, it may sound like a little bit like science fiction, but I think it's coming sooner than we think. Let's move on. Let's talk about some of the very, very interesting issues, some of the uniquely Jewish halachic dilemmas that this artificial intelligence can raise. I'm not going to talk about Shabbat. We alluded to it a few weeks ago. There's lots to talk about in terms of artificial intelligence in your home, learning about you on Shabbat, performing activities for you on Shabbat, all sorts of things. That is a whole discussion in and of itself. I'm not going there. But we'll talk about something else. And what I want to talk about is this. Mentioned already that these systems are being used, that they're going to replace large amounts of the workforce, right? They're being used in medicine. Many of the functions that a doctor can do will be replaced by AI. Not all, but some will. It's being used in banking. It's being used in security. It's being used in education, right? So the question is, can it be used in place of rabbis as well? Can AI come along and make decisions? Can AI come and give us psak halacha? rabbis may know something, may be able to learn and remember and look things up. You're talking about artificial intelligence, which in second has access to the entire corpus of knowledge that is there. Is there something that can? So I guess there are two questions to ask. Can AI replace my rabbi? And do I want AI to replace my rabbi? I hope all of you are thinking no. But so let's look, page number 3, source number 7. Just first of all, just to understand, again, what we're talking about when we mention AI, because with all of these questions and all these things, we need to understand the technology of what it is. We'll see in a moment the Shuk Mishneh Halachot, who we mentioned, Rabbi Menashe Klein, we mentioned last week as well, in a very different context. He has a whole series of tshuvot in Shuk Mishneh Halachot about whether a computer can paskin halacha. And now it's obvious to us all that he was writing these many years ago. The type of computer that he's talking about and the type of question over there is very, very different to when we're talking about a machine learning algorithm. But I think some of the points that he raises, some of them are irrelevant to our question, some of them are very, very relevant to our question. We'll see in a moment. But source number 7. So a couple of years ago, Jewish Action magazine in America conducted an interview with Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon. And they spoke to him about artificial intelligence in Jewish law. So one of the things, so he discusses here in the introduction as follows. He says, in 1997, IBM's chess playing program, Deep Blue, beat world chess champion Garry Kasparov. The principles of the game were programmed into the computer, which masterfully won the match by blindly searching through millions of moves. Okay, this is one type of artificial intelligence. You might, one of the terms you might call this is brute force, where essentially it's just given the information, it's given millions and millions of games which have been played and moves which took place, and it knows, it's able to analyze the patterns and see which ones worked and which ones didn't, and therefore it was able to win a game like that. Now, some 2 decades later, Google's AI subsidiary DeepMind devised AlphaZero, which is a machine learning algorithm. Now, this works completely differently, right? The first one, we said, was by brute force, whereby all the moves were input and it saw millions and millions of moves. Based on those, decided which one works best. It just very, very quickly can go through all of those, much quicker than a human can. Here, this is machine learning, which what that means is given no human input, aside from the rules of chess, no moves. It was just told the rules, and then it learns itself. It beat the world's best chess playing computer program after continuously playing chess against itself for just 4 hours. It played the game millions of times and learned from its mistakes. AlphaZero can teach us how to do trivia. AlphaZero is regarded as the best chess player in the world, human or computer. I don't know if that's still accurate, but that's not the point. And when playing, it actually displays evidence of insight, a new kind of artificial intelligence. Nowadays, AI no longer just acquires knowledge, it arrives at conclusions on its own. He says it's mevin davar mitoch davar. Okay. AI is no longer just feeding information into one big database. As you'll see with AlphaZero, there is actual learning going on. It's what we're talking about when we say machine learning. It's not just input and output, but it's learning and it's developing and it's coming up with things which were not there in the input because it's been able to learn. So again, so our question is, we want to know, can we use this machine learning to develop halacha? Can we now come along and ask it a shayla? Now, there are certain things where you don't really need the machine learning. There are certain things where all you need is just, matching the patterns or analyzing one, maybe a very good example of this. And, we already have Project Ashut, we already have Rabbi Google, and that's not what we're discussing. There is an organization called Kosharot, people may have heard of, which deals with kashrut, and they have different publications they make, and they give recommendations on certain restaurants, etc. They, a few years ago, developed something. It's on their website. You can see they call it a kashrut simulator. So you have a question that's happened in the kitchen, right? So the milky spoon went into the meaty pot, or what? These things happen all the time. So you go into the website, and it gives you all the options. You have a drop-down menu where you can choose from a box. It says, what happened? Was it a problem with food, or was it a problem with the catering? So you say, the problem with the catering. Say, was the kli that you were using, was it meaty, milky, or parrot? And you say what it was. And what happened to it? Was it hot or cold? Was it ben yomo? Was it eno ben yomo? Etc. And it can give you the answer. It's relatively straightforward. It's just a sophisticated flowchart. But we're talking about if there's something more than that. And the truth is, we'll see that even those simple questions, it's not just about a flowchart. Meaning, anybody who's learned Halachic Kashrut Be'ir. So one of the things when you learn Halachic Isur Be'eter, you learn Halachic Kashrut in Yeshiva. So you spend a long time talking about a drop of milk that landed on a meat pot, whether it landed on the inside of the pot, whether it landed on the outside of the pot. It was hot. It was all sorts of discussions. And sometimes people say that but what's the halacha? Is it kosher or not? Even in a case like that, where the poskim will write, they'll say if it's a shatat chak, if it's an extenuating circumstance, then the halacha may be yes. If it's not a shatat chak, the halacha may be. So it's not always so. So you can say, okay, so we'll add in the question to the flowchart: is it a shatat chak or not? How do you define a shatat? What is it, etc.? It gets a little bit more complex. But let's start before we jump ahead and jump forward into what we have now and what the future discussions are. Let's look a little bit at the past discussion. So source number 8. This is the Shuk Mishnah Lachot. He has a series of about 6 or 7 different shuvot where he was asked, or it was suggested to him that people were paskening halacha, quote unquote, from a computer. Right? What he's dealing with here seems to be, the specific question, but he's really building a general principle. The specific question he was asked here was in the realm of nidah, in terms of nidah, in terms of working out visatot, working out the monthly cycle, in terms of which days would be forbidden and which days would be permitted. And there are all sorts of complicated mathematical patterns and equations that are done. So already years ago, there were certain computer programs which could work this out. Now he comes vehemently against it. And he says no. Part of the reason why he's saying no is, again, because there is a certain hesitance and there's a certain reluctance, sort of, this is not the way it's been done in the past. Any new technology, that's coming in, you're bringing this in, you're going to replace. We saw the opinion of the Mishnah Hot, for instance, last week about genetic testing. We saw how opposed he was to that. And I will say, we, as you've all come to a series of five sessions about new modern technology and how it influences halacha. So clearly, we are all interested and we all believe that halacha should work hand in hand with technology, and that there is a room for these things, and we should be discussing, we should be open to it. At the same time, important to remember, not to scoff, I think to remember there is a place for, those who come along and say we need to be, we need to be moderate, we need to have the izonim and blamim, as they like to say nowadays. So we need to have the checks and balances, we need to have the breaks, not advance with things too fast. We start adopting these changes too quickly, we may find that we're making mistakes. So there is a balance that needs to be struck, and it is important that within the halachic conversation, there are voices like this. But let's examine it now in merits. He gives here 5 reasons why he believes one should not use computers in order to answer halachic questions. Again, he's not talking here about machine learning. He's talking about something very, very straightforward. And we'll see some of the reasons he gives may be relevant to our discussion, and some may. So he says the following. He says, first of all, source number 8. Chada, ki sharei kan lo kara v'lo shina v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim. You are asking your computer to paskin for you, well, the computer did not study, not Mikra, not Mishnah, and it didn't have Shimush Talmidei Chachamim. Right? Maybe artificial intelligence can be Shimush Talmidei Chachamim in some way. But he says, HaMachshev eno ela k'shofar u'mashpech ma shemachnisim bo motzi. Right? It's just like a shofar, which in modern Hebrew in the last couple of years it's become this colloquialism. It's a mouthpiece. It is a funnel. Whatever you put in is what is coming out. Clearly, as I've already said, that is no longer the case. So you're telling the computer what the halachot are. You're doing a search. You're saying the halacha is A, B, and C, and then you're searching. You're saying this is the date, and this is. Tell me what the halacha is. But what is it based on? Who gave it the input? That consideration is going to be very relevant for our cases. We'll see. He said, "Pashot ki הרבה הלכות זכויות לכל ההלכות מכניס אותו במחשב והמסתכל עליהם סומך עליהם." Says, I don't know, this computer, it's deciding, maybe it gave it, she thought like this, which are too machmir, which are too maker. Who knows what it's based. So that is consideration number 1. He says consideration number 2. כי יכניסו במחשב גם הלכות של אנשים מכל מיני סוג ואפילו מינים ואפיקורסים. Similar to the first one. In other words, you might put in opinions, not just opinions, which are minority opinions in halakha. You might input it with opinions which are not within the realm of halakha at all. And how can I rely on them? More or less the same idea. Number 3, he says, שלישייה, כיוון שלא למד הלכה בדבר קטן מאוד משתנה העניין בהלכה. Right? There are very, very small and very slight nuances in a case. We mentioned before about a drop of milk on the outside of the pot, the inside of the pot, keneged habas, lo keneged habas, keneged harotef. It might be, maybe the computer doesn't know how to distinguish between these things. Number 4, but Rabbi Kodesh al Kulam. Right? It's not just information. It's not just knowledge alone. You need shimush tamidei chachamim. Lo kol harotze litol et Hashem noter, ve'al zeh tiknu lekabel smicha. Going out to the next line in bold. He says, Mi shekara v'shina v'lo shemesh tamidei chachamim. Harei zeh am haaretz. Somebody who just learned from Svarim their whole life, but never learned from Tamidei Chachamim, they could still be an Am Haaretz. They don't know. They haven't learned the halachic system. He gives a very interesting analogy. He says, "Hisbalti b'makom acher, shekmo rofeh cholim, lomed 6 shanim b'tichon v'chayotze bo, ulachar shegamar b'tztainot הכי גדולה, עדיין אסור לו להיות רופא." He says, a person goes to medical school. They can study for 6 years, and they can come out with הצטיינות, some come out, but they still can't be a doctor. עד שישמש גימול שנים למעשה בבית חולים, ולאחר גימול שנים אם יצליח, like us. Okay, whatever the years are, whatever the category, the criteria are in whatever place, but there needs to be shimush, needs to be apprenticeship, needs to have it in practice. He says so too, right? In bold again, קל וחומר בבנו של קל וחומר, רופא נפשות, מורה הוראות. שאפילו ללמוד כל התורה צריך לקבל שימוש בהוראה. Rather than become a paskin, you need to learn from somebody who's paskin how to paskin. It's not just based on what's written in the books, right? It's not just regurgitating information. And then he says he has a foot reason as well. Okay, so these are some of the things. Source number 9 as well. This is a little bit more recent. This is from Rabbi from Goldberg, the book wrote on. He wrote this in a YU Torah to Go booklet regarding Shavuot. It's an article called Learning Offline in an Online World. And he says, Halacha and Hashkafa have never been formulated by analysis of stark information or knowledge alone, echoing the theme that we've just said. Our sacred Masorah has always placed great emphasis on the accumulation of experiential knowledge and sensitivity, placed a premium on guidance from those who have amassed the wisdom of life and serve as royal conduits of the wisdom of prior generations. A brilliant scholar who's familiar with vast amounts of Torah, but has never been Mishamesh Tamidei Chachamim, is not qualified to issue opinions deserving of communal deference. The Talmud tells us, Gdola Shimusha Yoter Milimuda. Right? Being mentored by Talmid Chacham is even greater than learning of his Torah. According to the Braita in the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot, one of the 48 ways, we'll come back to this Braita because it has some very interesting insights to teach us, but one of them is Shimush Chachamim, and he says therefore the Ratzon Hashem, the will of the Almighty on any given issue cannot simply be Googled or searched on the Barilan digital library. Right? Now, I think just about everybody would agree with that. But the question we're asking here is more difficult and is more complex because artificial intelligence is not just Googling and it's not just searching the Barilan library, but once it's had all that information and all that input, and it can recognize and it can get inside the minds of the posek, so to speak. And if the AI can learn how to play chess and can learn to become a world champion in 4 hours, so you can have years of Shimush Talmidei Chachamim from the writing, from the Tshuvot, potentially in a much shorter period of time. And now, do I need to be worried about my job? Okay, so this is so turn over the page, right? Source number 10. Can AI replace a posek? Let's see what a contemporary view on this question is. Jewish law is incredibly complex and nuanced, with numerous interpretations and applications. AI technology can provide data and information, but it lacks the ability to understand the content and to apply the law in a specific situation in a way that a human posek can. A posek has the ability to weigh different factors, analyze complex situations, make decisions based on a range of considerations, including legal, ethical, and practical concerns. Furthermore, Jewish law places a great deal of importance on the role of tradition, the transmission of knowledge from generation to generation. The expertise of a posek is built upon years of study and apprenticeship with other scholars, right? Shimush Talmidei Chachamim, which includes the ability to ask and to answer questions, debate different interpretations, engage in dialogue with others. These interpersonal and communicative skills cannot be replicated by AI technology, by the current technology in anything. In short, while AI technology can provide data and information to aid the posek in the decision-making process, right, and this is something very important we'll come back to because this is definitely something we should be using, it cannot replace the unique skills and knowledge that a posek possesses, nor can it replicate the interpersonal and communicative skills that are central to the role of a posek. Right now, the good news, I'm sure you've all guessed that this also was an answer that was written by AI. So the AI thinks that it can't do the posek's job, can't do the rabbi's job. So then that's good. In a few years, it will change its mind. But there was, it's mind-boggling that the ChatGPT itself is what wrote that, but I think there's a lot of truth to that. Just unpacking them and just going by these different the different considerations. This source number 11. This is not from ChatGPT. This is something which I wrote based on things I read in various articles, and what I managed to put together was 6 different reasons, 6 distinct considerations. In fact, is why we still need human rabbis and we still need human poskim, based on what we've said, maybe with a little bit of elaboration. So number 1, we said is really maybe a technical thing, and this is something Mishnah Apot maybe alluded to in some of his Shuvot as well, is replacing the interaction with the rabbi, right? Even if we get to the point where we say that AI or Google can already do this for certain questions and certain scenarios, that it can give us the correct information. There is something, and there always has been a value in terms of the halachic system of a question of a shoel coming to the rabbi and having that one-on-one interaction. The Rabbi Kimchi once said to me, he said, somebody comes to you and asks you a shayla. They say, on Shabbos, are you allowed to put, if you have a salt, are you allowed to put lemon in your tea on Shabbos? Because somebody has. So he said, you can listen to that question and you hear, what they're asking. They're asking about the technical questions, the question of Hilchot Bishul, and what do you do with the lemon and the tea and Kli Rishon and Kli Sheni and whatever it is. But there's something else that the rabbi needs to ask. It says, is everybody all right? Who's sick? Who's unwell? Is there something that you need? Right? There's another element there. And there's another element of that interaction and that connection which a person has with the rabbi, with the posek, which is extremely important. This was one of the reasons, by the way, this is one of the reasons why there was opposition to the writing of the Shulchan Aruch, for example, to the writing of certain, shorthand. When the Shulchan Aruch was written, it was shorthand. Nowadays, we have all sorts of shorthand halachic works, and the poskim were vehemently opposed to it. Said, no, when there's a shayla, a person needs to go and needs to ask a rabbi, and we need to not replace that interaction. That is one consideration that comes up, and it comes up very much here as well. Already, as I said, in many cases, you have shut SMS, and you have fax, and you have emails, and you have Rabbi Google, and all sorts of things, and sometimes it's been supplanted, and sometimes we pay the price for this. So that is one consideration. Number 2, in terms of the answers themselves, right? So we have the human factor in halacha. I took that phrase. That is not my wording. That is the wording of, and we go somewhere. It's not on your sheet. Yes, but there is an article that appeared in tradition quite a number of years ago by Rabbi Lichtenstein called The Human and Social Factor in Halacha. And there he discusses and he goes through, he explains how, I'll read some of it to you. He says that it's faceless and heartless supercomputer, a ChatGPT, into whom all of the relevant data is fed, and who then produces the right answer. Says Rabbi Lichtenstein, there is such an opinion, there is such a thought, and he says, I completely reject it. He said he completely rejects it. He said in reality, this portrait of a posek is mere caricature, limned by those who have most karu v'shanu, but certainly lo shimshu. You're noticing a theme. As anyone who has been privileged to observe Gedolim at close hand can readily attest, they approach Psak doubly animated by responsibility to halacha and sensitivity to human concerns. The balance between norm and need may be variously struck. And he goes on and he says, what are these factors, which are halachic, not extra halachic factors, halachic factors within the system? Things like, he says, that the apex stands, of course, b'koach nefesh. But there are other factors, local or general, of lesser gravity, include physical and psychological pain, financial hardship, social harmony, human dignity, sensitivity, any or all of which can affect psak measurably. For their inclusion in the halachic equation means that even at the formal and technical level, two supposedly identical situations are in effect not identical at all. Right? Now again, the AI that we have, the technology that we have today, cannot distinguish between those situations necessarily. Will it be able to in the future? I've heard people say, I've heard rabbis talk about this and say, this is something a human can do, a machine will never be able to do it. Very wary of saying that, because maybe the machine will be able to do it, but it's something we have to know that at least the machine will need to be able to do it. So that is number 2, the human factor. Number 3, I've written down, we alluded to this previously. This was, in the Mishnah Halacha, but which Beit Midrash was it trained into? Right? What is the input that it's got? Now, it's possible you could have an AI, and this is a question. Some of these dilemmas which are coming up, these are not just in the world of halacha, but these are in the world of medicine, in the world of law, in the world of ethics, sorts of things. You're asking it to make value-based decisions. We spoke about this 2 weeks ago. Whose values? Based on what? If psak means that we can give it every single tshuva that's ever been written on anything, right? Can be fed into the AI. There's no problem. But does that mean that every single tshuva that's ever been written, it gets equal weight? Do we want an AI that paskins like Americans, or that paskins like the Gush, or that paskins like that's Hasidish, or that's Litvish, or what? How do we decide? Right. So that's the question. How is it trained? And number 4, who is determining those values? Right? And this is something people may have seen. It was doing the news this week. Somebody had a discussion with ChatGPT about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can guess what kind of answers. You can guess what kind of, although it's supposedly objective, you can guess what its political leanings were. And it makes sense if you just take the internet as its model of the information that's been given. The majority of the information out there is going to be anti-Israel. So that's what it's going to come out with. But more than that, what are its values? What is right? Is it something which is meant to reflect truth and accuracy? I can tell you, ChatGPT, people have put things in and have asked, and it's given answers, and it's quoted scientific papers which don't exist. It's just taking things together and it's taking the patterns and it's written that. Truth is not a value for it. It's not part of what it's learned. You can't put into ChatGPT, tell me only true statements. Tell me only statements which cause no harm. It doesn't know what that means. It's not there. So if we want it to be answering values for us, we have to know. And this is a real question. This is a real problem, because these systems are becoming more and more common, and they are being used in many different areas of our lives. And we're going to ask questions. It's hard enough today. You go on the internet and you look for an answer and you try and get it. You don't know who's telling you what. This is just going to make it even harder. Who is behind it? There's Rabbi Dr. Jason Wien, who is in America. He's a medical chaplain in the hospital of Cedar Sinai, and he's written a number of books on medical ethics and things. He spoke about this recently. He said his suggestion was, in the same way that in other fields, the medical fields, we have hashkachan, and we have pikuach, and we have oversight over certain things that are being done. We're developing AI systems that are going to be used. You're using an AI system that's going to give you a medical diagnosis. Again, in a medical diagnosis, it's not black and white. There are different considerations and different value systems. He says maybe there should be. We should have already now, how exactly, in terms of how it's trained, in terms of what it learns. So that is a very serious consideration in terms of if we're going to listen to the answer of the AI. Another question, number 5, we're almost done, we've got 2 left. Number 5 is the black box problem. And again, this comes up in many of these, in many different areas, many different realms regarding artificial intelligence, which is the more sophisticated the system becomes, the better the answers that it gives, but the more difficult it is for it to explain those answers. There are systems that have been created which will act in a certain way. There are systems which can predict with startling accuracy, the likelihood of a person to have a heart attack in the next 10 years. It can tell you if they will or if they won't. You ask it, how does it know? It can't tell. So this is what's called the black box problem, that there's something inside which we don't know. Source number 12. This is from an article published back 2019. One of the extraordinary things about artificial intelligence is that you can feed it an incredible amount of information and it will make a very accurate decision, but it can't tell you how it got there. It could consider 1,000 different variables, recognize patterns that humans just can't possibly understand and come to the correct conclusion, but there is no way for us to understand why or how. Is that something that we want to rely on? Is that something that we should be relying on? Is that something we can rely on in Psak Halacha? So source number 13 is the Gemara in Eruvin that tells us that Rabbi Meir was the undisputed Gadol Hador. He was greater than everybody. And yet, we don't pass him like him. Why? Because his colleagues could not understand, they didn't understand his arguments. Right? So what does that mean? Why is that a reason for not to pass him like him? So different explanations are given to this. Rabbi Torchina suggested to me that maybe the idea over here is that Rabbi Meir, that you can have halacha if you can give the nimukim and you can give the explanations and you can understand. But if we can't understand, Rabbi Meir was the original black boxes. And there's an article I have here. I didn't put it on the sheet, but you can find it. It's available online. It was printed in Chakira, which is the Flatbush Journal of Jewish Thought. Now, in 2007, Rav Rabinovich, who was the former, he was the Rosh Hashanah of Ma'ale Adumim, tremendous article about Emunat Chachamim. We mentioned before, the Braita at the end of Pirkei Avot talks about the 48 ways in which the Torah is acquired. The 23rd one is Emunat Chachamim. What does Emunat Chachamim mean? Right? Belief, faith in the sages. Nowadays, many people say Emunat Chachamim, and they think Emunat Chachamim means the Chachamim say something, you have to accept it and you have to believe it, even if you don't understand. He takes the opposite view, and it's based in Rishonim, and he understands. He gives, for example, the opinion of the Tiferet Yisrael, one of the commentaries on the Mishnah, who says the following. He says, "She'eino ma'amina kol davar sheshomena." You don't believe everything that you hear. This is particularly a particular problem nowadays. Does that mean that peti yamina kol davar? Aval yamin l'chachamim b'chokmat haTorah afilu lo yasigem b'sichlo. Says when it comes to the sages, we have to understand what they are saying. We have to have faith that what they are saying makes sense. And he goes on and explains that what this means is, Emunat Chachamim means that you need to understand. You look at something that the Chachamim said and it doesn't make sense. Don't dismiss it. Look at it, investigate it, search, try and understand. He quotes the Sridei H. Says beautifully. He says another one of the 48 attributes is what's called Pilpul HaTalmidim. Translates as deliberation among students. So he asks, how do those two things come together? And he says that's exactly how the two concepts come together. He says, I'm quoting out this is the name of the Sridei H. So what it means is as follows. If one lacks faith in the words of the Chachamim, he tends to skim over them casually and arrogantly dismisses them, saying the sages just didn't understand. The result is that such a person does not struggle to probe beneath the surface and to confirm their words. In the end, it becomes clear that it was he who erred, not they. Indeed, it is a characteristic of intelligence to believe that it is not they who err, heaven forbid, but we, with our short-sightedness and limited knowledge, who are mistaken. However, to trust simplistically, not exert our minds with investigative, concentrated thinking, to say blandly, they knew we can rely on them without thinking, is strong. Rather, one must challenge their words with any contradictions or uncertainties, as if their author is one of us. Through this, we arrive at a more profound and analytic understanding. These two attributes, Emunat Chachamim, together with unhampered pilpul, provide the path of acquiring the knowledge of Torah. I think I've quoted maybe in this forum, maybe in other forums in the past. Rabbi has said something many times in his Shiurim. He says, what right do we have to argue against, to question the words of our sages from previous generations? He says, we don't have a right, but we have an obligation. We have to understand. We have to know what they said. So it's a beautiful, and you can look up this essay. I highly recommend everybody to read it. He talks about the fact that Emunat Chachamim means we have to have faith that what they said makes sense. And if we exert ourselves, we can understand it. So again, it's this idea that Psikat Halacha needs to be understood, needs to have reasons behind it. So you could have an AI system that's got all the shuvot in the world, and you can program it. You can say, I'm right leading, I'm left leading, I'm Hasidish, I'm whatever. And you can tell it how you want the psak to come out, and then it will tell you, and you say, okay, now explain. It will say, I don't know. It will just say, I saw a matar, but it can't explain black one. You can't accept that. That's a problem. And finally, source number 6, this one is a little bit more esoteric, but I put you, it doesn't have siyata d'shmaya. This relates a little bit to what we spoke about today between Kalmar and for those here. But there's a famous story of the Nadav Yehuda, who was the Rabbi of Prague. It happened once, and there was a question. They came and asked the Nadav Yehuda a certain question. I think it was a question in Trefot, whatever it was. And the Nadav Yehuda was a huge guy. He was head and shoulders above everybody else, and he couldn't answer the question. He came back to them after a few hours, after a few days, whatever it was. He said there wasn't a real question. You made it up. And they said, yes, we did make it up. We just wanted to test you. How did you know? He says, because when a Rabbi has a question and there's a certain siyata d'shmaya, there's a certain heavenly assistance that come that helps him to find the answer. I was trying to, I didn't have that siyata d'shmaya. I could tell that it was not a real question. So that is something that's a factor again. Does that would that siyata d'shmaya extend to AI? Maybe that relates to the first part of the shiur. Maybe if it gets to the point where the AI is a conscious being, if that were possible, maybe then we'll have siyata d'shmaya, maybe not. I don't know. But that is so. Those are some of the considerations. So based on all of that, and based on where we are today, your Rabbi is not dispensable just yet. But one of the things that comes out, source number 14. Again, this is an article which was written couple of years ago, Aviad Moshe, and I'm not sure who he is, but he is a rabbi and he's also a computer programmer. So he understands a little bit about Tuchna and about machine learning and all these things. He wrote this this article. This was published in Tammuz Tafshin Pei Aleph, as a response regarding these questions, what the Mishneh Halachot had written, and there were other articles written about using machines, computers for Psak Halacha. And he suggests the following. He says, יש חששות רבים מפני שימוש בתוכנות מחשב בתחום הפסיקה, שאי אפשר לבטל בהינף יד. There are serious considerations here against using, in various ways, shapes, and forms, of using computers for psika, and we can't just wave them away. חששות אלו הם בעיקר מבעיות חינוכיות והרגלים לא טובים שנובעים מהשימוש במחשב. Okay, historically, and a lot of the opposition has come from חינוכי reasons of habit. But again, the truth is, 20 years ago, if you walked into a midrash and you took out a computer, it was quite unusual. Today, depending on where it is, I walk into the Eretz Kenigsberg midrash, for example. Everybody is sitting and learning, but most people have got computers up open on the desk, and you're using it or using it to find the sources, whatever. This is something which has come in. Is there a price that we pay for it? Perhaps there is, but the benefits may outweigh that. Maybe not. Nonetheless, it says, בין בעיות חינוכיות ובין עצם הדיון לגבי ממנות תוכנות מחשב השימוש בהן בפסיקה. Okay, obviously these educational questions, that is one, we can put that to the side, that everybody has to decide based on their hashkafa and based on their rabbanim and how they want to approach that. But in terms of the actual, the formalistic question here, can the computer be used as an aid for psika? He says, בשאלה עקרונית, אם ניתן לסמוך על תוכנת מחשב בפסיקה הלכתית, ראוי לחלק בין 3 סוגים של תוכנות. So he suggests 3 different types of program. Number 1, תוכנה שתפקידה לקדם סדר ויעילות. Right? You can use in many different ways in many different areas. If we're using a computer program just to make things more efficient in terms of the way that the posek receives the questions and the way that he answers, and that there's no problem with that. Number 2, תוכנה שתפקידה לגלות או להוסיף בעיות הלכתיות שיבדקו לאחר מכן. You could use a computer to reveal and to identify questions, problematic things, which afterwards a posek, a Rav, needs to go out and check. For example, you could use a computer that could check a Sefer Torah, could see if there are letters that are missing or something like that, and then somebody could come and check that. And then you have a תוכנה שתפקידה לסווג שאלה הלכתית על פי ניסיון העבר בעזרת שימוש בבינה מלאכותית. It's a new category. Where we have a halachic question, where you could ask the computer to scan all sorts of halachic questions from the past and search for patterns in them, search for patterns in the Shuvot, and try and come up with an answer. Again, what he says is the first 2 could be done by any old computer. The third one, if it could be done, could only be done by AI, could only be done by machine learning, and then we still have some questions. So in summary, I think there are many ways in which AI, AI is coming. It's not like once upon a time there was a question, should we use AI or should we not use AI? We all are using AI. We all will be using AI. That is a given. That's not something that we can fight, something we should fight. That's a fact. And to what extent, where should it be used? What kind of oversight? What kind of values? Who is deciding? Who's putting those inputs? What are those inputs? These are very real questions, and these are very real dilemmas that we should be aware of. And in terms of using it for halacha, for psak halacha specifically, certainly I think that AI can be used as a tool to aid a posek, can be used as a tool to help the rabbanim, can replace the rabbis, not just yet.
Okay. The truth is that maybe just artificial intelligence isn't enough. It's not just about intelligence. You can accumulate all sorts of information and become intelligent, but that doesn't mean you can put it all together in some creative way.
Right. There's a whole question in terms of creativity. What is the role of creativity in that process? Yeah,
it's the old story. Which Rabbi you ask to give you a sakana. Because first of all, you've got the Mizrahim, you've got the Hasidic, you've got the Lithuanian, you've got all of that. And you can find probably opposite sucking that you can get.
Right.
So that's which you can't. And as you said, and what do you want? Do you want a Lithuanian answer or etc.?
Somebody said you have the Halacha Shiur, the Bar-Ilan project sponsor. You can find there are all the answers that have been written for all sorts of things. The next the program people really want is you type in the answer and it tells you who the rabbi is in the past.
The other thing is when you said it's like black box, that's what they said about the Rabbi. He also didn't write where his sources were, and people today are trying to find where did the Rambam get all these particular. How did he arrive at his particular sakin that he gave? So same thing, he didn't write his sources.
Yeah, he didn't write his sources. So you find, for example, the Kenigsberg Mishnah goes through, and wherever he can, he tells you where. Right.
He was like a boss.
I think the key words in your presentation really were in item number 10, where it says that what a posek presents cannot be replicated in the interpersonal and communicative skills that are central to the role of a posek. The sensitivities of the person, apart from his knowledge, etc., etc. I mean, I had a Rav in the States who two people would come with the same question and walk out with two different answers.
Right.
So the sensitivities.
Definitely. That is certainly the truth. Is when I put this into the system before I wrote, can I replace a posek? I wrote, can I replace a rabbi? And there it's actually very interesting because it came out. There it wasn't just about asking questions. It was about pastoral care and all these things. And it said, there are all these. And I wanted to focus more on this element, which is why I didn't bring that answer. But it's just fascinating that the AI itself was able to generate them.